Hey everyone, welcome to Guardian Recovery Network Live. I am your host, Kevin Michael Lazek. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. I am extremely excited about our guest tonight, the one, the only Maureen Cavanagh. Maureen is an author. She is a family recovery coach. She has a bunch of letters. I know she's working on some other letters that she's getting to be her LADAC. She has done everything from teach CEU events to write curriculum for families. And tonight we're going to switch it up a little bit. The last 6 or 7 episodes, we've had people in recovery, and we talked about their stories and how they have obtained and maintained sobriety. But tonight we're going to switch it up and talk about it from the family perspective. Often the family is left out of the equation, and arguably it's one of the most important aspects to people getting well in treatment. And Maureen is an expert on that. So I am excited to talk about that tonight. We are going to bring in Maureen. Hi, Maureen.
Hey, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
We were both kind of flat before this.
No, I got to stay excited so I keep myself awake.
Totally. So, and I know I missed that you started Magnolia New Beginnings. I kind of want to give you an opportunity to talk about that because it's such a great organization and has reach all over the country. So can you talk about the work at Magnolia New Beginnings?
Sure. I always say that, I started Magnolia in 2012. So we've been around a while. And I always say that it got as big as it did because it was a trauma response. I could not stop moving. So I was worried about my daughter. And all I could think about was, where is she? What is she doing? Is she okay? Is she not okay? Is she alive? Is she, you know what I mean? It was so bad that I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was not taking care of myself. But I channeled a lot of that into creating that nonprofit. And so something good came out of all the spinning that I was doing. It wasn't good for me, but it turned out to be good for a lot of people. And then eventually, when I got myself under control, I made it, helpful for everybody. But yeah, because families, we have our own recovery process. And I think sometimes that families fight harder than the person that they're trying to get into recovery. They fight harder against the things that they need to do than anybody.
Yeah, it's easy to, and I even being a person in recovery work, I mean, it's easy to kind of point the finger and say they need to do this, they need to, do that. And in reality, and I was kind of reading on it before, that, I mean, there's so many things that a family member should, try to implement in order to best be able to support their loved one, connection, joining some sort of group or having some sort of community, exercise, taking care of yourself, eating right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot when your whole entire being is concentrated on this person that you're afraid is going to die often, right? That's what we're afraid of. And so I used to say, I'll take care of myself when my daughter's well. Well, it doesn't work like that. You can't do that. The financial mission of Magnolia for a long time was to raise money for sober living. That's kind of what our financial mission was. But really, the goal was to bring people together. And there's over 25,000 people on the support pages, and then another 11,000 in the 2 recovery groups that I run. And when I started those, there really wasn't anything. There was very little anyhow. Yeah. So now they're all over the place. But the problem is you don't know that you're getting evidence-based scientific information on there. You're usually getting somebody's opinion. So we try to facilitate the groups, and that with everything I do, I try to make sure that we're talking about what's true and not what somebody heard, Uncle Tony saying at the Thanksgiving table.
There's always a lot of bad information going around.
Absolutely. It's always the loudest voice in the room. That's my problem with a lot of meetings too for families, is we're not really worried about giving them information that's true. We're just trying to like kind of placate them and pacify them. So we're telling them what we hear, what's gone circulated around, which may have nothing to do with the truth.
One of the things I was reading on, and it's so true, but learning how to manage expectations. And I think that's where a lot of family members get jammed up. The expectations are too high, and when that person doesn't meet them, they feel let down, and like the person's not feeling well. Do you feel like that is a skill that's critical? And
Yeah, I mean, we want this vision of what and I always refer to I always think of it like a child because that was my experience. Although I went through this with lots and lots of family members and partners but the person that really ripped my heart out was my daughter. So I always go back to the mother and the child thing. But we want them to be, or I wanted her to be, who I expected her to be when she was 10. So I had this whole idea of who this was going to be as an adult. And and we had made big plans. She was going to go to college here and do this and do that. So I was constantly trying to make her meet that expectation. And those were not no longer her expectations, they were mine. And so every time she failed, she just felt worse and worse and worse. And I say failed, but I mean didn't meet my expectation, but failed to do what I expected from her. We have to learn how to hold space for people
yeah,
and to walk alongside them while they're struggling to hopefully get well and have more healthy behaviors than unhealthy behaviors. And because we're afraid, we just want what we want, right? But it doesn't work like that. And that's when I when I work with parents, I try to get them to decide what they're willing to do, because we want the person that needs to get in recovery, that we feel needs to get in recovery. Want them to do everything, and we don't want to do anything. And that's really true. We just want to be angry and scared and upset and frantic, and we want to do all those things, and we want them to go away. We put it all on the person that is using drugs and alcohol. And the truth of the matter is the only person you have any control over is yourself. And even if somebody else is spinning out of control, you still have control over yourself. You're just not exercising it.
yeah.
So yet you're asking the person that is you want to get into recovery, to change their whole life and to do all of these things and meet all these expectations. But meanwhile, we're sitting on the side, or I was anyhow, acting like a complete maniac.
And I think with staying on that kind of expectations theme, especially when a loved one finds recovery and is early in recovery, and I think just because you take the alcohol and drugs out of people doesn't mean their behaviors are going to change right away. It takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes work. And I know I talk to a lot of parents that like, hey, my kid's 3 months sober, but he's still doing X, Y, and Z. Why is that? And so even when a person is sober, those expectations can be too high given where they're at.
Because we don't understand, and that's the other problem with how we work with families is there's no real education for families, right? So they go to meetings and they may feel connection, or they may or may not feel connection, and they may get a little bit of advice, but they're not given real education. So as you know, I created a curriculum for facilitated family meetings called FAST. It's Family Focused Addiction Support Training. And what I did is create a 26-week curriculum of 15-minute educational modules at the beginning, and then 10-minute self-care modules at the end, so that people could learn about what post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which is what you're talking about, right? The 2 years it may take for somebody to really feel normal again. But when you tell in general, when I teach a class or when I work with families and I say, do you know what post-acute withdrawal syndrome is? No,
They have no idea.
they have no idea. And and this is not the kind of question you would say, oh, this is one of the things I'm going to need to know about this book, because you've never heard it before. So you're expected as a family member to understand something no one taught you and you didn't know to ask.
Yeah.
And when I was going through this with my daughter, I said to myself, if I ever get through this, because I had my doubts, not, I believed in her. I wasn't so sure I was going to make it. But if I ever get through this, I'm going to educate myself and become the person that I wish that I had when I was going through it with her, because I reached out and there was nothing for families.
Especially back then.
Yeah, there was nothing.
I
And
mean,
there were meetings, but there was no education at the meetings. It was just more parents talking about really just marinating in the trauma, I feel. And we know that that's not good for anybody to just sit and think about the trauma and talk about the trauma. I mean, you have to eventually, be productive and try to move on from it and educate yourself and take care of yourself. Otherwise, you go right down with the person.
yeah. Two sickies don't make a wellie, right?
Not at all. Not at all. Trust me. I was there. I was the sickest person you ever met, I think.
What was the craziest? I know your book has a ton of great stories, but what was the craziest thing you trying to help your daughter?
I don't know. I did a lot of crazy things. The name of the book is If You Love Me. And it was published by Macmillan in 18. And I always say we all have the same story. And I hear from parents all the time. They're like, I read your book and I did the same thing, whatever crazy thing it was in there. Few people have done all the crazy things. I think the craziest thing might have been kidnapping her. Kidnapping her. She was in the back of a car just about to use. And I flung the door open and she actually turned her head and smiled at me because she saw mom, with not putting all the things together. And I picked her up and ran with her and threw her in the back of my car. And my ex-husband, who was very busy screaming into the face of the guy that was driving, yelling for him to come. We were surrounded by people and they're all screaming and I can't even hear what they're saying. One of the girls that was in the car opens the door and is got the phone on filming me. I'm trying to grab for her throat. It was just, oh my God, it was crazy. And all this time I'm on top of my daughter holding her down because we're going to kidnap her. And we get her in the car and we're going. And I realized I had no place to bring her. This was the worst thought out kidnapping in the history of kidnapping because there was no plan after that. And my poor ex-husband, her father, was like, he was not in on the plan. He thought we were going to talk to her. But I had the seats down in the back and everything. I knew what I was going to do. I just didn't know what I was. So we drove up to Gloucester, and at that time they were part of the it was the beginning of the police-assisted recovery, where they would take the person and bring them to treatment. But the person had to want to go to treatment. They were not going to take a kidnap victim to.
I love that. You kidnap a person and then you show up at a police station.
Oh, my Lord. So we drove up there with the hopes that somehow I could change her mind in between, but she didn't change her mind. So that's probably the craziest thing, but it's a lot of crazy in there. So I'm not quite sure. There could be something else in that.
And the title of the book, If You Love Me, I assume that's a tactic, right? That you used with her. If you really loved me, you would change. If you love me, you would do this.
You would think, right? I mean, I always, when I decided to call the book that, we were in a publisher's in the meeting with the publisher, and I said that I wanted to call the book that, and they really that's how they took it. And even kids, right? Kids are always saying, if you love me, you'd buy me this. If you love me, you'd take me, I don't know, you would let me stay home from school. There's 100 of them out there. But one night when she had come home, and she had the longest period of sobriety. She had a couple of months, and it was the longest period of sobriety that she really had. and she had gone through treatment with this great group of people, and then also gone up to the sober living, and was at sober living with the same people, and they were just so supportive and tight and just helping each other. And I got a phone call one night at around 10:30, 11 o'clock, that she had not come home after work, and that most likely she had had a recurrence, and they couldn't find her, that she wasn't answering her phone. And it was heartbreaking because she was doing so well, and it was the first time she had gotten to that point. And now keep in mind, this is somebody who had, by the end of it, had walked into over 40 different treatment centers, 40 different entries into some kind of treatment, overdosed to the point of death 13 times, probably another 20 overdoses on top of that. So this was a really long, hard, story. And she was doing better. And so it was hard. It was hard. And this was towards the end of her using. So they looked for her all night, because sober people are the best people in the entire world. And they just combed all of New Hampshire and half of Massachusetts for her, and eventually found her and brought her home at about 3:30 in the morning. And she thought, they were all coming in with her, but they knocked on my window, and I brought them in, and she's sitting on my kitchen floor, and she's dirty, and she's crying, and she's starting to get sick, and just so sad, just so sad. It was starting to set in. And I said, "Katie, honey, I love you so much, and you're going to die." And she looked up at me and she said, "If you loved me, you'd let me die."
Oh.
So that's where that comes from. And that was the moment that I realized I didn't have a clue. That I thought that, because we had gone through so much and we were so close when she was growing up, that I thought that, it was always we. I was always doing that, and with good intentions. I would have carried her through this if she would have let me, but it doesn't work like that. So, that was one of the most heartbreaking things, and there were lots of heartbreaking things, but I realized that I really didn't have a clue as to what she was going through, and that, of course, I could not let her go, and I had no intention of doing that. But that's where the title of the book comes from, and that's also really where I started to understand that we were going to have two separate recoveries, and that I needed to take care of me, and I needed to get stronger because I was falling apart. And I was starting to get educated, but I needed to get really educated and understand this monster of a disorder, and that she was going to have her own separate recovery, hopefully, and that all I could do was love her and believe in her. And
Isn't that picture you painted too, of kind of, because I could like picture it, here she is, she's doing so well, she's surrounded by a good group of people, and seemingly it seems like she has everything she needs to stay sober. But addiction is so cunning, baffling and powerful and insidious, and it's like the flip of a switch. And
well, and there's so much trauma involved and so much pain involved, that what better time to put the monkey wrench in is when you're starting to do well, right? I see it happen all the time. And this is when families get mad, but you can't get mad at that. You have to continue to support. It's such a hard thing for, to not get angry and not say, "Okay, that's it. I'm done with you," and think that you're doing something by doing that. But people tend to get well, have a higher percentage of people getting well when they're supported and loved. And that doesn't mean enabling. That doesn't mean being codependent. That doesn't mean doing it for them. That means holding space. I'm there for you. And that nothing is ever going to change that.
so one of the things I always love when you talk about is kind of the studies that were done on the brain of family members. And can you talk about that a little bit, how it kind of hits the same receptors as a person struggling with addiction?
It's amazing, really. So this research out of the University of Texas Tech by these, by a bunch of people, but the three primary researchers are Kimball, Shumway, and Bradshaw. And you know, anybody that's really interested in could look up their names and the University of Texas Tech, and it'll pop up that they've done tons of research. But they're doing research on the parents, on the family members, the people that have been supporting a loved one that is struggling with a substance use disorder. And they've seen, they can show in functional MRI testing that the people that have been supporting the longest, that, I mean, like when I was just totally in, I thought it was our disease. I was really, really no boundaries at all. And those are the kind of people that the parts of the brain that light up when they're presented with an image or being told something about their loved one getting into treatment, the parts of the brain that light up on them are the same parts of the brain that light up during a craving for their loved one. So when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, now I understand what a craving feels like, first of all, because I walked into the places where no 50-something-year-old woman belonged, looking for my daughter, and really, you know, knocking people out of the way, not any fear at all, because the logic and reasoning was gone. It was all, I was working out of that, you know, part of the brain that just drives somebody to use when they're addicted. And you know, I really understood then why that when she got that craving to use again, why it was so almost impossible not to give in to it, because I couldn't not give in to the things that I felt like I needed to do to save her.
Yeah, it's a physiological response.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
extremely powerful. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. You know, they can't understand that piece of it, that, you know, that someone could be, you know, that what seems like insane, you know,
Yeah.
where one moment they're doing so well, and then you know, a second later, it's like I said, the flip of a switch, and they're off and running. And you know, and you and I both know that's, you know, it takes a long, long time for people to recover, and it takes a lot of work. And you know, you're able to rewire some of those pathways in your brain and learn new ways to deal with things. And she's been sober. She just celebrated 5 years.
She's going to be 5 years sober in July.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's my hero. She's the most awesome person I've ever met in my whole life. And you know, really worked really hard for this. And it hasn't been easy, but she's doing it.
It never is. You know, anyone that stayed sober for any length of time, they'll all tell you the same thing. It's hard. It's a lot of work. And you know, even, you know, I'm almost 18 years sober, and sometimes I think I'm still crazy.
Well, we all are.
Yeah. And
You know what? I think that I work with a lot of young people now, and I think that that's one thing people, when they get into recovery, they don't realize that everybody's crazy. It's not it's not just them. They think that because they went through all this that but they don't understand that maybe, you know, everybody doesn't turn to drugs and alcohol, but I have crazy days, you know, and then the crazy day stops, and then the next day isn't so bad, or weeks or whatever, you know. But I think that people a lot of times in early recovery get so used to just slamming themselves that they feel like, well, this is because of who I am. It's like, yeah, I don't know. We're all kind of like that.
so I want to kind of have you give the listeners kind of, you know, if you're a family member and you're struggling, you have a loved one that's struggling, like the top 3 things that you would recommend.
It just like very general.
Yeah, I mean,
I think get educated, first of all, get educated and go to good sources, you know, and if somebody tells you something, check it out, because there's a lot of bad information out there. If you can find a Magnolia fast meeting, they're starting to pop up around, go to one of those. They have lots of good information in there. Join a Magnolia New Beginnings, that we have groups, and contact me. I'm always happy to explain something. get connected to people that are also going through the same thing, but are not, try to find people that are not going to tell you what to do, because they're not going to hold your hand if things don't work out for the rest of your life. So you got to go with your gut, and to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself. When we're strong, we want to be like a rock. We want to be the strongest person our loved one has, so that when they do need help, they can come to us. And never cut anybody off, even if all you can do is text them because they're so toxic, and that can happen. And or if the only thing you can say is once a day, I love you, and then block them if you have to for a little while, because you don't know what you're going to get back. I mean, that's in the most extreme circumstance. I think that, we can't cut people off that are sick. We wouldn't do it with any other disorder.
Yeah. I want to talk about boundaries too, because I think that's an area where people really struggle. You'd be a billionaire if you knew the exact line to draw, and, when that would facilitate your loved one getting help. But can you kind of talk about boundary setting and kind of the do's and the don'ts of it?
So I think that that's what it is. It's not, the boundaries are for me, right? When I was making boundaries, they were my boundaries. They weren't hers. I have no control over her. So I can't make boundaries for her. I can't punish her with boundaries. I can't do stuff like that. What I needed to do is and this is what I do when I work with families, when I do the coaching, is I sit them down and we make boundaries that are for the person, and we write them down, and we have to be able to live with them. So, because we know that our decisions sometimes we're scared, we're always afraid if we do the wrong thing. So whatever it is, we decide we have to stick with it, but they're mine. So my boundary became, when I started to get well, that definitely no money. And that had gone on for a long time. I always paid for her phone because I wanted her to be able to call me. So the phone was for me. It wasn't for her. It was for me.
Yeah.
And I was very clear on that. I would take her to lunch or take her to dinner, but I would not take her shopping. I wouldn't do that because she was homeless at the time. So it was only going to get turned into something else. Anything can be turned into money. And I turned my phone off at night. I started turning my phone off at night because there was nothing I was going to be able to do at 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
So those were my boundaries, but that doesn't mean that would work for everybody else. And when she started to see me getting stronger and taking care of myself, it gave her, it changed things with her too. And it could be just a coincidence, but about the time that I started to decide I needed to take care of myself too, she started to get well. But there was never a moment where she didn't feel loved or she didn't feel wanted. We wanted her back home. We just had rules around it.
Yeah.
And she wasn't, up for that at the moment. But I never at any time ever even threatened to not be there for her. And I think that's so important, is we have to stick with people.
And I think what you said too, you have to pick something that you can live with, because there's nothing worse than saying something and not following through. I know in my story,
Yeah.
because we'll just, we'll walk right through it, and we'll manipulate, and we'll do everything we can to get our way. And if we know there's weakness there, we'll exploit it.
And by the same time, I hear a lot of parents tell other parents, you have to cut him off. Don't even talk to him. Don't answer the phone. You have to cut him off. Give him, 6 weeks. Tell him to come back in 6 weeks when he's well. Well, unless that person is fully prepared to sit with that parent for every night of their lives while they grieve their child, if things don't work out like that, you don't tell somebody else what to do.
Yeah.
If they feel like that's what they need to do and that's what they can live with, then that's one thing. But you don't tell people to cut their children off. I'm so sick of listening to that.
Yeah, it's because there's consequences on the other side of that.
Absolutely. And you want the last thing you said, if God forbid something like that happens, you want the last thing to be, I love you, not don't call me for 6 months until you're sober.
Yeah. That's tough. That would be tough to deal with as a parent.
The whole thing is tough, and sometimes we do have to step back because the person is dangerous or toxic. But hopefully there's some way of letting them know that they're still loved, even though you can't be around them right now.
And I want to give some suggestions. There's a ton of good support groups out there. The support groups that you guys run, Heron Project has some really good ones.
Great ones. Yeah, great
That
meetings.
are run by clinicians. I think Partnership to End Addiction has started a couple up. Do you know of any other good ones?
Spectrum Health Systems has a fast meeting. I believe we're going to have one out of North Suffolk Mental Health in Boston, and out on the Cape. I'm talking to a few people, but they're popping up all over. There's I like smart recovery meetings because they're craft inspired, and they used which I think is a really good method of communication. So they teach that during their meetings.
Yeah. Katie's a good egg, isn't she? At North Suffolk.
Yes, she's the best. She's the best. There's a great group down there.
Yeah.
Great group.
People. The up near you too, the one that Kerry runs, the bridge.
Oh, she's awesome. Carrie's awesome. Carrie Ann. Yeah.
That's a good,
Yeah.
good resource as well. So we got a couple minutes left, but so next week, you and I are hosting a CEU event, integrating families in the treatment process. So maybe if you could just give us a minute of why you think that's important and the benefit of it.
Families are the number one reason people go to treatment, right? I don't think anybody'd argue with that. You know, people want to get back to their family. And yet when we drop our kids off or dropped our loved ones off at treatment, most of the time, and in my experience, like I said, she walked in 40 different times. I was given 3 family meetings all around discharge planning, and one hour long just deluge of information that made me like, oh my God, after I left there. So that was, I mean, you know, that's bad. And we had excellent insurance and went to some great places, and I got zero help. And if I know you don't, I know you know, I'm not shy. So I was asking for the help and I couldn't get it, right? So the need to integrate families is so obvious. And I think that sometimes there's a lot of people that work in treatment that are not the family member. They're the person that has a lot of guilt around what they did to their families. So when we try to talk to the people in treatment, they really don't want to deal with this because we freak them out. And, you know, I was scary. I admit it, but we have to find a way to educate families. And the perfect time to do this and the perfect people to do this is treatment, because they're already dealing with this all the time. They should have the science and the evidence, right? But families are the reason, and they come home to us too, right? So not only are we the reason they go in, but when they come out, even if they go to a sober living, we're still there. We're always going to be there. And if we don't understand what's going on with them, we can screw them up in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the things that I unwittingly said over the course of those years, you know, how we got to make a plan. There needs to be a plan. And I wanted her to plan out the next 3 years. And I'd be, you know, she wasn't able to do that in the beginning. So I think that the need to integrate families into treatment and to make us part of this instead of us and them, which hasn't been working, right?
No, it's been siloed off.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you. You are truly the best. You're one of my all-time favorites.
Same here.
And I am looking forward to next week, and you are always a wealth of information, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And next week, I had my weeks wrong. Carrie McDonald, who is the executive director of Pine Tree Recovery up in Portland, Maine, will be our guest. She's also a Plymouth House alumni. So tune in next week. Thank you all. Have a great night.